"Wake up," said the old Magi. The little Magi was preparing a presentation for the Wizard Conference, and he was becoming generally annoying to the old Magi because he was seemingly to be overly compulsive about this, and the old Magi finally was reaching the limits of his patience. So the old Magi called the little Magi and said, "In order to prepare your final preparation for the conference, you need to put down your books and your papers, and you need to go and find the shadow warrior, and he will teach you what you need to know." And the little Magi said, "But I can't go. I've got a presentation. I got to get ready." But by now he knew arguing with the old Magi was not a productive activity to engage in. So he realized he was going to be making a journey. So he got all his stuff together so he could set out on the journey. And he knew it was quite a ways to where the shadow warrior was. So he traveled through the forest and then through the land. And finally he came to the strangest place he'd ever been in his life. It was a place where the desert and the mountains and the forest came together. It was the Bad Land. It was a strange land full of rocks and full of gullies where millions of things could hide and would never be found. It was a place that seemed to have an eerie feeling to it in its very nature. And with a great hesitation, he came out and he found then and saw this thing before him. And immediately he stepped back in horror of the place. And he wondered how he would find the shadow warrior and how anyone could dwell in such a hideous place. And then as he was standing there, suddenly he heard a voice behind him saying, "Welcome." And he turned around, and there standing on a rock was one of the strangest people he had ever seen. He was tall, he was thin, and he seemed to move with a grace and a speed that the little Magi had never witnessed in his life. And the shadow warrior looked down on him and said, "Why have you come?" And he said, "The old Magi sent me. He said you could teach me. Can you teach me?" And the shadow warrior says, "That will depend. What is the Magi's creed?" And the little Magi said, "I seek to know in order to serve." And the shadow warrior said, "And what four things will determine whether I can teach you or not?" And he said, "The purity of my intent, the focus of my will, the level of my awareness, the quality of my character." And the shadow warrior looked at him further and seemed to look right through him and said, "Very well, we will test these. So you sit here and observe what happens. And after it happens, if you can report back to me accurately what happened, then I will give you the secrets." So the shadow warrior, with that said, went bounding down the hill to the bottom in the Bad Land, and he seemed to be looking around. He seemed to be studying where he was. And the next thing, once he seemed to be comfortable in his surroundings, he went over and he took things out of his pocket and he left them on a rock. And then after he had done that, then he came back and he seemed to, all of a sudden from a distance, the little Magi could see that a change seemed to come over him. And then, to the little Magi's horror, out of nowhere, hideous monsters appeared as if they just stepped from behind the rocks. And in an instant, the shadow warrior was surrounded by the most hideous monsters the little Magi had ever seen or ever imagined. And they all started moving toward the shadow warrior. And the little Magi was terrified because after they killed the shadow warrior, they would come up on the hill and kill him too. And he'd never seen anything like this. And he looked again at the shadow warrior, and to his amazement, whereas he was frozen in fear, the shadow warrior seemed to relax. And the little Magi was amazed. And the monsters got closer and closer and closer. And then all of a sudden, in an instant, the shadow warrior moved with a speed that the little Magi had not imagined possible. With his staff, he attacked the monsters. And in a short period of time, The entire circle of monsters were destroyed. And then it seems like they seemed to move back into the air and into the shadows. And once again, there was nothing there. The shadow warrior alone remained. At this point, then the shadow warrior came bounding back up the hill to the little Magi. And by now, the little Magi was quite shaken. And the shadow warrior said, "Tell me what you observed." And the little Magi said, "Let's see. The first thing you seemed to do is you went down as if you were searching for a certain place. You were studying the surroundings." And the shadow warrior said, "Good. You have learned the first lesson. A warrior never goes into battle in a helter-skelter fashion. You must always go there. You must always search the terrain. You must always choose your battleground. Warriors choose their battleground." What next? And the little Magi thought, well, you took some things out of your pocket and you went over and you laid them on the rock. And the shadow warrior said, "Yes." And the shadow warrior said, "Good, you've observed the second thing. The second lesson is discard what is unnecessary. In a battle for your life, a second can be an eternity. Possessions that are unnecessary will only tie you down. Discard everything that is unnecessary." Third, what happened next? And the little Magi reflected a moment, and he realized and he thought, what you seemed to do then is it was as if from the distance, it was as if somehow you began to change your state. It was as if somehow you entered into a sense of purpose. And the shadow warrior said, "The old Magi has taught you to observe well. A warrior must gather all of their resources around them. They must make a choice. They must commit to action. They must focus their will at a critical point." And what happened next? And then the little Magi realized that there was something that had happened. And then he thought, and then he said, well, the next thing was the shadow warriors. The monsters appeared out of nowhere, and they started moving toward you. But instead of being frightened, it was as if you made some kind of change. And the shadow warrior said, "You have observed well. When faced with odds that cannot be dealt with, relax, let yourself go, fear nothing. Only then will the powers that guide us open the road and lead us." And then what happened next? And the little Magi thought. And then he realized that there was something that had happened that he hadn't even commented on. And that now he realized that it happened, but he hadn't seen it before. And he said that was perhaps the strangest thing. The monsters kept coming, surrounding you. And just before the monsters were there, it was weird. There was a little flower going out of a crack in the rock. And you went over and you smelt the flower right before the monsters were on top of you. The shadow warrior said, "You have observed well. When faced with odds that cannot be dealt with, you must let your mind meander. You must distract your mind. Anything will do." Then what happened, said the shadow warrior. And the little Magi said, "You move with a speed that I did not think was possible. And in almost an instant, you vanquished all of the monsters, and they seemed to then dissolve back into the rocks." And the shadow warrior said, "You have observed well. And a battle for your lifetime is a second is an eternity. A warrior must compress time." And the little Magi thought and said, "Well, how do you do that? How do you compress time?" And the shadow warrior looked at him and said, "That is an excellent question. Sit here and meditate on everything you have seen. And tonight, just as the sun passes over the horizon, I will return and tell you the secret of how to compress time." And so the little Magi sat and he meditated on everything that he had seen and everything he had observed. And that night, just as the sun began to set, As if out of nowhere, the shadow warrior appeared. And the little Magi says, "You have returned." And the shadow warrior said I would. The little Magi said, "Then how can I compress time?" And the shadow warrior said, "Sit here tonight, and tonight you will see that the stars will come out, and you'll look up into the incredible firmament filled with millions of stars. What you need to do is this: you need to find your star. One star will call to you, and it is only with purity of intent, focus of will, level of awareness, and the quality of your character that you will know what that star is. And you must stare at the star until all of the other stars disappear. You must focus all of your attention, all of the energy of your being at one small point of light. And when you can do that, you will compress time, and you will have all the time you will ever need." And then the shadow warrior disappeared again, and the little Magi sit there, and more stars began to come out, and he sat and stared up into the amazing night sky. And after a while then, one particular star seemed to blink and seemed to pull him toward it, and he focused his attention on that one star. And he began to take and narrow his focus and look and look and look. And then all of a sudden, the little Magi realized that all of the other stars had disappeared. And at that point, he knew he would always have enough time to do what he needed to do. And he got up and he left the Badland and he went back into the forest, back to the old Maj. And as he went, he passed through a village, and the people in the village were somewhat shocked as they looked out and they saw this strange apparition passing through the streets of their city. And it was as if they had witnessed the birth of a new star.
In the last sessions, we've learned a set of tools for teaching. One of the things that Wyatt said is that teaching and learning are part of a cybernetic loop. They depend upon each other. They are part of the same system. One of the things you may have noticed also is that this program seems to have hit a turning point of some kind. Do you notice something different seems to be going on in the last few sessions? Do you notice that it feels different? Who notices that things feel different now? Raise your hand. Good. There's a structure to this. There's a design to this. There's a plan behind this. We'll talk more about that later. What I'd like you to do right now is ask yourself, what have you learned in the last 2 sessions? What have you learned in the last 2 sessions? We've talked about the learning styles, and now we've learned about them as teaching styles. And then I also taught you about some of the frameworks that I use, some of my favorites, and the structure of how those work. I'm going to give you a hint. If you want to learn something, teach it. If you go into something to learn it with the intent to teach it, you'll be much more effective learning it. Does that make sense? Now, if you just say, I think I'm going to teach this someday, you're not going to be as effective at learning because you don't have a specific context to apply it to. So what I'd like to ask you right now is, what have you learned specifically about how to learn better? Okay, what have you learned about how to learn better? And I just gave it all to you. I just encapsulated it for you. Okay, so what have you learned about how to learn? We're going to take a swing at this right now. What have you learned about how to learn? Just take a couple of minutes and answer that question to yourself. What have you learned about how to learn? While you're thinking about that, while you're in the process of learning how to learn, I'd like to ask you, if you could do it all over again, what would you have done differently before you came here? What would you have done differently before you came to the program so that you would have learned how to learn better while you were here? What would you have done in your life? Right? What would you have done differently now that you know what you know? Okay, so if you could have taken just, this first maybe half of the program back with you, what would you have done differently before you came so that while you were here, you would have learned how to learn better?
Okay, I'm Mona from Newport Beach. I would have listened to Wyatt's frameworks calls, and instead of transcribing them from the Guru Mastermind thing, I would have practiced drawing mind maps before I got here.
Okay, excellent. What level is that? Is that learning? Learning about yourself? Learning about yourself and how you learn? I'd say that's level 1. What'd you learn? It's a learning thing. Good.
Okay.
Mike Shalevsky from New Jersey. I would have put into practice everything I heard rather than focusing so much on just taking notes and getting a conceptual understanding. So that way I would have had more experiences to draw on that I could connect up with what's taught.
Excellent. What level? What'd you learn? What'd you learn about yourself? What'd you learn about yourself and how you learn? Hint? And it's something he would have done differently.
Yeah.
Good.
James, Los Angeles. Answering mostly the second question you asked, I would have developed specific outcomes for myself so that I would learn this more in detail to apply it.
Excellent. Good, right? Develop specific outcomes. What level? Good.
Richard from Wyoming.
Yep.
I would have scheduled a date for when I return to teach the most important thing is what I learned to some friends, and also set other outcomes just for 20-year, 3-year, and 1-year plans.
Yeah. You hear the difference? I would have pre-scheduled a time when I get home to teach other people what I learned before I got there. What are we talking about there? Level 1? Level 2? Level 3? It's up there, isn't it? It's depending, it could be 2 or 3. Now, why did he come up with that and everyone else didn't? And how can you come up with answers like that? Okay, so what did you learn? How will your behavior change? You got to notice when, so it is a big realization to think of learning as behavior change. If we can all walk out of here with just that, if we can get that out of this program, our job is done. We've all made a quantum leap. I'm not, of course, satisfied with quantum leaps. I want to make 2 or 3. I like major evolutionary change. But if you can learn about yourself and how you learn and impact that level, set up conditions so that you learn better, that's huge. If you can start setting up conditions in your future, intent, so that you learn better when you're going to learn, much bigger. I would argue that his answer was probably more level 2 than level 3. Because level 3 involves actually having feedback loops so that you can learn about yourself and how you learn. So if he would have said, what I probably would have done is I would have called Wyatt up and I would have hired Wyatt to come and coach me while I taught the material. Do you understand the difference there? getting the breakthrough? Good.
Okay.
Hang on a sec. You know what? Let's use what we just learned. Who just really got something? Like a really like, oh, wow, okay, good. Who didn't really have a big wow there on that one? Okay, so everybody was lying, except that guy. You still don't get it?
I get the overall concept, but I didn't necessarily have a big wow.
You didn't have a big wow? No, what was your answer? You want to come over to the mic? If you don't have a big wow on that one, I got to talk to you. Sorry to interrupt your flow, Wyatt, but torpedo therapy, I think you call it, right? What was your answer when I said, okay, what did you learn? If you could do it all over again, what would you have done before you came here?
It was relating to planning, it's similar to the answer given before, to plan how to teach what I've learned before I get back.
So you'd have planned how to teach what you learn?
Correct.
Okay.
Like a friend of mine knows that I'm here and he wants to know what I'm learning here. So it's sort of like already planned that we're going to talk about what's going on here before we get back.
Okay, so you would have planned that before you left. In other words, you would have planned to get together with him.
Yeah.
So you were probably at level 2.
You could argue that.
Remember, a person will tell you all about themselves in the first few words. You will learn a lot about them. So the idea of calling Wyatt up and saying, Wyatt, you know what? I'd like to hire you to come be there, observe and coach and mentor me while I'm teaching the material so that I can actually become generative in my ability. That's not a big aha for you?
No, I mean, that's pretty cool. It wasn't in my plan for the day, but
Okay, it's pretty cool?
it's pretty cool.
Okay, do you buy that it's another
Yeah, I
quantum
do.
leap in terms of another evolutionary leap?
Yes, I do.
Okay, but that's not a big wow. Evolutionary leaps aren't that big a deal to you?
Yeah, I didn't, maybe it hasn't sunk in yet.
Okay, I'll buy that. Let's stop right there. Good. So time out. We can't dive in right now. It's very important that you just wrap your head around this. Okay, you've got a couple of people here who have spent a lot of our time learning and trying to figure this stuff out and unlock the Rubik's Cube. And these aren't just little techniques. Okay, I don't want you to walk away from this and go, oh, okay, well, the answer is to call Wyatt up and hire him to come watch me teach something. Although that would be massive evolution probably from whatever you're doing now. And if you just use that as a technique, that would be a quantum jump. But it's about being able to think like this. It's about being able to come up with this stuff in your life, not when you're sitting in a seminar on learning, but when you're with your child or you're with the people that you work with, and to apply this to that situation. Okay? I care. I want you to be able to do this. I want you to walk out of here being able to do this. I am committed to breaking through whatever you've got that's preventing you from having the evolutionary breakthrough. Right? That's why I'm really staying learning about it.
The problem all of us have, including myself, just listening to everybody talk,
Does anyone hear a projection coming? Yep. Okay.
is the fact we have our boundary of our identity. We want to add to our identity, but we don't want to give it up. Learning is changing your identity, who you are. To lose who you are and to become something new is the challenge. And how we see ourselves and perceive ourselves can be very scary when it's not what we have as an image within us.
Good. Thank you. So that's a piece. There's actually a lot more than that, but that's a piece. You got to become not me. You do. So what I'm suggesting is, right, most of us want to think we get it. Okay, so we look at everything, we validate, go, oh yeah, I know that. Yeah, I knew that. Oh, okay, I get it. Okay, I get it. Yeah, let's move on to the next thing. And what I'm trying to say is we're doing a little temperature read of the room, and I'd say that as a group, we're probably averaging right now about a 1. We've gone from 0 when we walked in. We've probably moved up to about a 1 into the 1.3 or 1.4 as a group now. Okay, as a group. And what we want to do is work together to try to all get to at least 2 in our thinking by the time we walk out the door, with some people reaching up into 3, and every one of us at least having a couple of flickers of, Oh, now I see why that's important. Okay. I'm going to shut up now, Wyatt, and get the hell out of this.
Well, you're doing a good job.
Getting into
You're doing a
trouble.
great job.
Thank you.
One comment on the gentleman over here. So he mentioned the word identity. So identity is how we define who we are. It's the box we put around ourselves that then we live in. And part of the thing is, once again, becoming not me is to break down the walls of that box and move on. In NLP, there's a teaching story, and Grinder and Bandler happened to be next door neighbors to Gregory Bateson, who was one of the precursors of cybernetics. And John Grinder was a professor of linguistics, so he was couched in all of the linguistic vocabulary, which unfortunately has come into NLP and therefore confused people for centuries, but that's another whole issue. In any case, so he's having a conversation with Bateson. And so they're talking about nominalizations. And nominalization is when we take a process and we freeze it into a noun. So there's no such thing as beliefs, there's no such thing as values, there's no such thing as behaviors. Now, you're beginning to look at me like I'm crazy. There is a process of believing, there is a process of valuing, and there is a process of behaving. One of the real indications that people are becoming semantically trained is they begin to move beyond the nominalizations back to the process underneath it. The trouble with nominalizations is they're fixed, frozen, whereas process is an ongoing thing. So Bateson was talking to Grinder, and Bateson said, "Is I a nominalization?" And Grinder said, "No, it's a pronoun." And Bateson said, "Too bad." So what Bateson was saying is that, is I a fixed, static thing, or is it an ongoing process? And Grinder then answered as a grammarian and said the grammatical classification of the word I is as a pronoun. And Bateson's response was, so much for grammarians and their failure to understand the world. Because instead of referring to I, we should refer to I-ing, because we are continually changing. We are an ongoing, living, evolving, moving thing. And when we begin to realize that, then it helps us to realize that when we're stuck in one place, that once again, that's a temporary process, because we are simply an ongoing activity, and that when we nominalize ourselves is when all the problems. You see, this is the danger of psychoanalysis. From the NLP point of view, psychoanalysis deals with figuring out how you got in the mess you are. So let's say you're screwed. Most of us at some point feel we've been screwed, or we're screwed. So what we want to do is get unscrewed. So psychoanalysis says if you want to get unscrewed, you got to go back and figure out how you got screwed in the first place. So you go back to the past. Now the evidence is that doesn't help you get unscrewed, it just screws you in even more, because you've now got a rationalization, justification, and excuse for why you are the way you are and why you can't be any other way. Whereas what the NLP operates out of a present state, desired state model. Where are you now? Where do you want to go? And how can you get there? And you don't need to know how you got to where you are. You just need to know where you want to go. And that's where you need to be focused. Now then, when I teach the Enneagram model, and at the same time I always warn people in the training that it's a dangerous model, and that any typology is a dangerous thing. And people kind of look, well, how can that be? Isn't it good to understand myself? How many of you have tried to figure out why you do what you do? Okay, most people at some point in their life try to figure out why they do what they do. And some people are better at it than others. And so when I was younger, I remember very clearly I was in seminary, and I was studying Jung, and I was really interested in Jungian psychology. And I was reading all of the books on Jung, the archetypes of the collective unconscious, and I was trying to analyze my dreams, and I started having dreams in which I was analyzing dreams, and it got a little freaky there. And one day I woke up and I realized, hey, that I was pretty good at this stuff. I'd figured Wood Small out. I had that sucker pegged. I could predict with 100% certainty what Wood Small would do on any given occasion, because I knew where he'd come from, I knew what he was, and I could predict. I had him nailed. And then one day, then I suddenly had this amazing realization. Wait a minute, I am Wood Small. And what have I just done? I've just built a box around myself by defining who I am, and now what started off as an explanation of my behavior has now become a trap, and I can't behave in any other way. And at that point, I resolved no more psychoanalysis, no more trying to figure out why you do what you do. Have freedom to live the way you want to be. And I closed the door. And now then, so models, then the better the model is, the greater the danger of identifying with it and defining ourselves in the terms of that model. Human beings don't quite fit in any model. The more you define yourself, then the more you try to live by that definition, the more you put people in a box and you put yourself in a box. And so we need to be aware that identity is one of the most important things. We need to be aware of the degree to which we create our own boxes and then that we live in them. And freedom is letting go of those boxes and moving on. In designing and organizing any kind of a training or even organizing a book, there is a powerful technique that will allow you to do that I teach in the trainer's training. I'm going to explain to you what it is. It's a very powerful tool. So we've got the format model. We've got the 4 quadrants. So you've got some content that you want to train and you want to put it into the 4 quadrants. So what is an easy way to do that? So one of the best ways actually comes from Walt Disney Studios here in Hollywood. And it was created by a gentleman named Michael Vance. And he originally came up with this method for helping to create the Walt Disney cartoons. And so it's a method that combines brainstorming, and most of you know what brainstorming is, in which you want to separate idea generation from idea evaluation. And also it works with a rather interesting invention that was a total failure. It's called a Post-it note. And we've all got little pads of Post-it notes. And the guy that created the Post-it note was trying to create a glue that would stick. And it ended up not sticking. So he failed to create what he set out to do. But somebody was clever enough to figure out, hey, that's actually a pretty good idea. We can take it off and we can move it around. So what you do is this. This is called storyboarding, created by Michael Vance at the Disney Studios. And it's the best way I know for helping to design your training. So you get a bunch of Post-it notes. And either as an individual or a group, you take the topic you're going to present on and you start brainstorming anything that'll go in the topic. And you just write it down on the Post-it note. Write it down on the Post-it note. Stick it on a piece of paper. Write it down, stick it on a piece of paper. You want to get yourself in a childlike, spontaneous, play-like state. You want to eliminate all criticism because premature criticism destroys creativity, and you just want the ideas to flow. And you keep letting the ideas flow and flow and flow till you got all of these Post-it notes all over the piece of paper. The next thing you do is once you've got all of this there, then you begin to cluster it. So you take the various Post-it notes and you say, okay, where does that go? Does that go up here? Is that here? Is that here? Is that here? I'm not sure. I'll put it between. It doesn't seem to fit anywhere. I'll put it off to the side. So the second thing we're doing then is once we've got it all, then we're sorting it into the various quadrants. And once we've got it sorted, then we'll look and we'll see, okay, we got a bunch up here, a bunch here. Maybe we need to do some more brainstorming down here because we need some more stuff here. So we go back through the process again. Now we've got it clustered into 4 different quadrants. And then the next thing we got to go through is we've got a sequence. So we go, what would we need to teach first? What would we teach next? So and the great advantage of the Post-it notes is we can move them around. We can stick them in different places. So we can put it here. If we think it goes 2 places, we put it both places. Now in each quadrant, we begin to sequence it in the order in which we're going to present it. So we lay it out. And then we look at the sequence and we review it in our own mind. And we step back and we go, okay, is it complete? Is there anything missing we need to add? And then the final thing we do then is we contextualize it. So we say, okay, we've got to hour training. So in an hour, how much do we think we can accomplish in the hour? We're maybe not 100% sure, so we need a little material left over in case we're too short, and we need to figure out what we're going to leave out in case we're too long, and then how long will it take to do it, and then we get ready now then and design our training from that. And then the next stage, actually, that we also teach in the trainer's training is then we take and transfer that to flip charts. And you can put your whole training on a flip chart. A lot of people worry about how can I remember everything that I'm going to cover in the training. Well, if you prepared your flip charts ahead of time, and later we'll talk about maybe the difference between flip charts and PowerPoints, but as a trainer we prefer flip charts. If you had all the flip charts prepared ahead of time, you would transfer all of the information then from your storyboards into your flip charts. And on your flip charts, one of the keys is you can write very lightly in pencil stuff on your flip chart. So when you're standing next to it, you can see it, but your audience doesn't see it. But if you're worried about keeping track, about staying where you are, if you've got all the stuff on your flip charts, all the information you need to cover is there. All you got to do is look at it. You don't want to read your flip charts, but all you got to do is look at it, and it gives you the whole outline of your training. And if you get up right next to it, you can write very carefully in pencil, very lightly, and any information you're worried about remembering, write it down so you can forget about that and you can focus on the delivery. So these are some of the keys. So once again, now you can do this for a short thing like a presentation. You can do it for a long training. One of my students out in New Zealand who does 20-day trainings has an entire wall of a room, and he's got all of the pieces of that 20-day training and 4 quadrants for each day laid out. And periodically he'll go in and say, well, what would happen if I'd switch this day and this day? And he'll move it around and he'll sit back and he'll look at it. Or he'll teach a piece and he'll go back and he'll say, that wasn't quite right. I needed to add this, or this didn't go quite right. And he continually refining it and modifying it, and it gets better and better as he goes along. So this is a very powerful tool. It's called storyboarding, and it's one we would recommend you use if you're preparing any kind of a presentation, if you're preparing a training, whether it be an hour training or multi-day training, and if you were writing a book or giving a speech or preparing a blog. Any of those things, this same process lends itself to. So I just want to mention it in passing. I've described it at a level that you should be able to use it. All you need is a blank piece of paper and a series of Post-it notes. And sometimes we'll use small Post-it notes for individual ideas and bigger Post-it notes. And if you really want to get into it, then you can rewrite it and have different colors and all of that. But all of that's unnecessary. The basic idea is you need a rapid way of chunking and sequencing and being able to rearrange the sequence and check it out and see what happens. So that's a tool. Your tools are your storyboards, and as a trainer, your tools are your flip charts. If you're not sure of the flow of your presentation, once again, put it on the flip chart. If you're really hung up, put a flip chart in the back of the room behind the audience that you can reach from the stage. That'll have the outline of your presentation of what you're saying on it. And of course, you'll be amazed, but everybody will see it. Most people will never see it and have no idea it's there. And if they do see it, so what? It's simply an outline of what you're doing in the presentation. It's a tool to help you. So one of the things is a lot of people, as I said, you got to be a master of your content. But being a master of your content, then, there's some things that can help you. So when you're beginning to learn and you're a little worried and you're worried about leaving things out, the problem is if you're so focused on what you're going to say, you can't concentrate on how you're going to deliver it to the audience. So put it on your flip chart. If your flip charts are sufficiently complete, you don't need to remember anything. Okay, so let's move on. We're going to talk about the upper right quadrant. These are the divergers. We said divergers learn. They need to answer the question why. As in, why should I learn this? Why should I do it? And therefore, as a teacher, we said, you need to be a salesman. You need to be a motivator. You need to get buy-in so that people are ready to learn what it is you have to teach. So there's certain things you want to do in the Y quadrant, and there's certain tools you want to use. So let me just mention some of the things that you want to do in the Y quadrant. These are the training goals. First is what we call RRROEE. Now, what does all that stand for? What that says, first thing you want to do when you get ready to do any training is put yourself in a resourceful state. Resources and self. It's amazing how people rush. They get into a presentation, they go there, and they're not in a resourceful state. So the first thing is put yourself in a resourceful state. The second R is make sure your audience is in a resourceful state. Make sure your audience. If people are too exhausted, we may stand up, do an exercise, do something to get the audience in a resourceful state. Third, third is rapport. Make sure you've got a positive relationship with your audience, one in which there's trust, communication, two ways. Next is O. O stands for outcome. Know what it is that you want to achieve. What is your outcome? What is your reason for being there? And EE is make sure that it's ecological and ethical. Make sure what you're teaching is ecological and ethical. Okay, so those are the basic, that's where you start. Number two, reorganize yourself so that you are passionate about what you are presenting. If you're not passionate about what you're presenting, then you've got no business presenting. So you need to be passionate, excited. You need to connect your head and your heart and your body. You need to be emotionally engaged about what you have to say. If you're not passionate about what you have to say, you're never going to touch the hearts of your audience. Third, if you don't believe in them, they won't believe in themselves. So therefore, your whole attitude toward your audience needs to be one of positive reinforcement, needs to be one of encouragement. We're all too used to criticism, and we need to take exactly the opposite. We need to build people up. We need to believe in them. Frequently, it's interesting, Bandler did some research, and so you would give people homework. And so that if you don't give much homework, then people think, oh, they must think we're not very bright and we can't handle. If you give a lot of homework, it's a lot of work, but people think, oh, they must think we can do it, otherwise they wouldn't have given it to us. So by having high expectations of your audience is one of the most critical pieces of teaching. They're the classic experiments that have been repeated many times in a teaching environment where they take a group of people, they give them a standardized test, and half of them, they divide them into two groups. They tell one teacher that these people are slightly slow, so you got to be careful with them. They tell the other teacher, you got a really bright group. These are real flyers. And then the teachers teach them for a semester. At the end of the semester, they go back to the standardized test, and the students that have been taught by the teacher that thought they were slow end up underperforming, and the ones that were taught by the teacher that thinks they were bright and brilliant end up overperforming. So the attitude of the teacher comes through. The attitude of the teacher comes through. So you've got to make sure you've got a positive attitude about the capabilities and abilities of your students. Next, know your audience's outcomes and interests, because if you're going to make it relevant, if you're going to connect and motivate people, motivation is for the heart, relevancy is for the head. If you're going to do these two things, you've got to know who's in your audience so you can know what to connect up to in order to demonstrate that. Next, capture and hold attention. You've got to do something then to get people to start paying attention to where you are. Get buy-in. You need to make some kind of a statement then that people are going to, what we'll call pace and lead, pace their model, state the way they are. One of the most effective ways to get rapport with people is say, you know, I know how you're feeling. I was sitting there once myself. And then describe how you felt in a way that matches their feelings. And they go, hey, this person knows what it's like. They've been there. When you can articulate the other person's position better than they can articulate it themselves is the greatest technique to get rapport. In therapy, it's the most effective thing in therapy. When people realize, It's like, who are you to help me with my problem? And when they realize, because the way you state their problem, that you understand it better than they do, then they go, oh, okay, now this is someone I should listen to.